watch this.
Well, one of the things I tell people in politics is your friends come and go, but your enemies accumulate. And so after 16 years, I may have had more enemies than I did friends in my district. Who knows?
A surprise shakeup in the Idaho Senate, something we've never quite seen before in recent memory. Sitting Senate Pro Tem Chuck Winder talks about his historic loss in the Idaho Republican primary. And after the dust has settled on that primary election, what have we learned about what the State House could look like next session? A leftover of last legislative session, the sale of the ITD property. With a lawsuit expected in court this summer, there's a question about whether Idaho's Attorney General presumed responsibility in filing paperwork. 281 votes. That's the unofficial difference between Senator Chuck Winder possibly extending his already longest-serving senator status into the 9th term, and him being the first sitting Senate President Pro Tem to lose that position in a primary. Winder, who represents a sliver of West Boise and a notch of North Meridian, lost to challenger Josh Kaiser by 281 votes. Senator Winder has been in public service and politics for decades, elected to the Senate in 2008, elevated to leadership in 2010, but that was all but eliminated in what was, without a doubt, the biggest upset of yesterday's election. This morning, Senator Winder sat down with us to talk about the result of that race and his time in the Senate. He wanted to thank his supporters in what was District 14 and is now District 20 for their support the past 16 years. Winder was a bit tired this morning, having stayed up way past midnight to catch the results and then getting up, like always, at 4:30 a.m. to start his day. But mostly, he was just as surprised as anyone with the outcome.
Oh yeah, it was a shocker to me. You know, I knew that it would probably be a close race because, one, it wasn't a presidential primary, so you don't get quite the same turnout. The party itself was out promoting my opponent, which they don't normally do in a primary. They're normally neutral. So there were just a lot of things going on, I think. You know, my opponent, you know, worked hard. He was out walking neighborhoods and talking to people and while we were in session. So I think there were a lot of factors that went into it.
What else made the difference, do you think?
Well, I think there's lots of things. Obviously, the amount of money that came into, you know, the race from the Young Americans for Liberty and Make Liberty Win group. But I think they probably spent, you know, $200,000, maybe $250,000 to defeat me. But I think it's hard to, you know, once people get the idea that was projected that, you know, I was the swamp king, that I was, you know, opposed to, you know, Second Amendment rights and all that I was a big spender, it's tough to get that out of people's mind. And they had their message out there, you know, for a month or so before we were able to even get into the market.
So just too little, too late?
Too little, too late, I think.
Would you look at your race and say it's like either a microcosm of the way things are going in either the GOP or Idaho politics?
Both. You know, I think they were able to pick me off with using a lot of out-of-state money, really ugly, dirty politics in their promotions. So I think, unfortunately, since they were able to pick me off, it'll probably be easier now to say, okay, well, give us more money to do this in our state, and we'll knock some of these other guys off. I mean, they came close to getting the speaker. And I think, you know, as our parties narrowed down the primary process, that's hurt what I would consider a true conservative approach. But it's because it's easier for the far right and the far left to have a lot of passion. And the people in between really don't get energized very much. I think the turnout hurt. I think the fact we didn't have a presidential primary tied to the regular primary hurt the turnout. And I think that hurts, you know, the more traditional Idaho conservative.
Do you leave with good thoughts like you're about politics and Idaho and the State House and what goes on here?
Well, I leave here with the fact Idaho's a great state, has great people. Nobody's indispensable, no one's irreplaceable. So I think there are good people here that'll still do good things for the state of Idaho.
Senator Winter told us he wishes more good people would get involved in politics, maybe run for office. As for his plans post-term, he plans to stay involved in local politics, help out anyone he can. He will continue to serve on several boards. He'll focus on his ministry work and spend more time with family, like watching his grandkids play sports and compete in karate. Oh yeah, he will also now have his winters back. So Senator Winter, at the age of 78, hopes to get back into skiing, he told us, something he hasn't been able to do in a dozen years or so. So keep an eye out for him on the slopes at Bogus next season. So something Senator Winter did say about the state of Idaho politics and the state Republican Party. He laments the fact it is narrowing, as you heard him. Idaho GOP closed its primary election 12 years ago. They put into their platform and party rules what defines a Republican. And you also heard Senator Winter say as well that many other self-proclaimed Reagan Republicans, that they have said, that narrow scope seems to squeeze them outside of the party's focus of the future. Senator Winter said in a primary election, the party has usually been neutral in its support of GOP candidates. Not so much this time. Andrew Bartline talked to Idaho GOP Chairwoman Dorothy Moon today, and she is far from neutral on the results of yesterday's election.
Yeah, the Idaho GOP isn't hiding the fact that they've had favorites in this primary election. I talked with Chairwoman Dorothy Moon, and she's very open that she had support for specific candidates that she says reflect the party platform and will vote in alignment with that platform. And the whole party platform and structure ties back to some of the lowest level races precinct committeemen.
Well, the grassroots spoke in the fact that we did maintain a lot of precinct committee races. Doing so, we will now have the delegates go to Coeur d'Alene, and hopefully we can keep the same folks in our administration that we currently have.
These elections that I think the general public long thought was really not that big a deal are now getting tons of attention. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of power. They are censuring lawmakers.
They can do a lot, and that's kind of their job. They are the base, the foundation of this party. And to me, they're the most important part of this party.
And they elect the people that elect you, if I understand properly.
Correct.
As you have become chair of this party, it seems that it has become more conservative. Do you believe that's going to hold based on what you're seeing with those committee results?
Well, first of all, I disagree with that. I think with the Republican Party, the expectations for some counties were not the same for others. If everybody would follow the rules, I don't think we'd have the hard feelings that we've had in the past, and it has created the division that we had once I became chair.
It's a long list of people that the central committees have censured.
Well, yes, especially when it's very contrary to what our platform stands for.
I think some people would say the accountability comes back at the elections. When I look at this list of people that have been censured, Matt Bundy and Julie Yamamoto are the only two I know of that didn't win their election last night.
But you've got to also remember Yamamoto was on the Education Committee, and school choice is a fundamental value in our platform. So when you don't allow even a hearing on something as important as school choice, then it's going to raise the ire of people who want some options. I think this coming year and next 2 years in the Republican Party are going to be very exciting. Now we're fighting ranked choice voting. We have boxes and boxes you'll see out there of literature to get the information out against the dangers of ranked choice voting, which will harm our state.
The primary right now does block out independent, unaffiliated voters. There's more of those than there are Democrats in the state of Idaho.
But Andrew, I don't want the independents and the unaffiliateds coming in and picking my quarterback for my team.
Does it feel that way, that it's our team versus their team? We're all Americans. Is America not the team?
There's some stark differences, and I think everybody knows that. It sure does raise the ire of a lot of folks in this state when you have a drag queen show on 9/11 in front of the Capitol on a Sunday, and you want kids to go up and dance with drag queens.
Do you think there's a better way to characterize the Democrats than that?
Of course I was sensationalizing right there. You do know that.
I know that, and I'd prefer you don't. I mean, you're the same woman that told me last night that you don't like to use the word rhino.
I don't, and I haven't.
I want to talk to that person.
Well, like you said, iron does sharpen the iron. In the legislative arena, it does. It does. I mean, and it's much more prevalent when you are engaging with those in the Democrat Party or any other party. I think that Idahoans, people don't move here because they're unsure. I think they expect it to be a conservative state.
Seems like you've been enjoying your role as the chair. Do you plan to stick around?
I think I will. I'll let you know right now, Andrew, that I would like to be chair for 2 more years. And it's my job as chair to make sure we maintain and uphold the values of the Republican Party.
So there have been some people that have complained and said the party's too hard one way or the other on just the hard line of the rules. It seems that that's the way it's going to stay.
We'll find out in June if that sticks that way. It is interesting that just before the primary election yesterday, the party put out a list of candidates that had not signed the integrity and affiliation form that they give to candidates, saying they will follow the party rules, they will follow the party platform, or be subject to censure, that kind of stuff. There's a long list of those that didn't sign that, and some signed it with exceptions. So we'll see how that plays out.
See what their voting record turns out to be.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, so let's broaden this breakdown even further. Boise State political science professor Dr. Jacqueline Kettler has been paying attention to Idaho politics for the past 10 years. It's her specialty, as well as political parties, interest groups, and campaign finance, which is important considering the amount of finances that were funneled into Idaho by interest groups from outside Idaho in this primary election. Granted, we don't have the final numbers yet on how much was spent, nor do we know what this means ideologically. But Boise State's latest public policy survey showed Idahoans across the board thought the state was headed in the wrong direction. However, based on results from yesterday, the question is, which direction is the wrong direction? Other than it being a bad day for a high percentage of incumbents, it was kind of a mixed bag of results last night. Some far-right winners, some more mainstream winners. Both factions can claim some sort of victory. And a lot of those wins seem to follow a lot of the money. So how much of a factor was that spending from, quote, out-of-state sources?
I think that's a great question. And we do know in research that spending the most money does not guarantee a win. However, so much of this money was spent in independent expenditures in negative type of advertising, whether it was robocalls, mailers, social media ads, television ads, really attacking some of the incumbents. And so I think that's where we have some questions on, well, maybe it didn't play a role in, for example, in Speaker Mike Moyle's race where he was successful, but we also know that Senator Chuck Winder was really attacked. Did that play a role in how voters assessed the candidates in that race and helped his opponent be successful?
Can you remember the last time a sitting Senate pro tem lost an election?
In Idaho, it's been quite a while. I think it's 1988 when then Senator Pro Tem Jim Risch lost, but that was in the general election, not the primary election. Usually, when you're at those top leadership positions in a chamber, you've usually been in office for a while, you're usually pretty safe, you have a lot of resources. But we also know these divisions within the Republican Party are deep here in Idaho. And Senator Winder's been really in the mix of some of these high-profile issue debates. And so I think really did attract a lot of money and other kind of organization in trying to defeat him.
I think in the end of the day, I think voter turnout's going to be like in the mid-20s. How does that change the outcomes?
Well, when you have a lower turnout election, then you tend to get the base that is really motivated and often more ideological that's going to turn out. You know, who's turning out can shape the outcomes of these primary races, especially some of these primary races, it's not a huge number of people. And some of the races were really close. And so who's turning out really matters.
Well, that turnout statewide ended up being about 24%. In Ada County, Idaho's most populous, turnout here was about 18% of registered voters. And the independent expenditures she's talked about, the money coming in from outside, again, those are outside influences or outside PACs. Think of them as that, but they have nothing to do with the candidates in the race. These numbers, the financial numbers, the result numbers, like all the results, they are unofficial until they are certified coming up on June 5th. The Republican primary could be considered the be-all, end-all for who ends up running the state next year. But Dr. Kettler reminds us today there's still a general election in November, and there are double the number of Democratic candidates for legislative seats than there have been in the past. So keep an eye on that. So could we see a more competitive election next fall? I guess we'll find out. The Boise, Idaho Transportation Department campus on State Street remains empty, and it likely will for some time because of what happened with the transportation budget to end last legislative session. Passing that budget canceled the sale to a private group. The budget bill went into law without Governor Little's signature because, as he explained, a veto would have stopped nearly $600 million in road and bridge repairs around the state of Idaho. But the inevitable lawsuit was eventually filed by the Hawkins companies, the Pacific companies, and FJ Management, claiming the state reneged on a done deal. Okay, so now that case waits to be heard by the Idaho Supreme Court this summer. But that's not the only legal development in this matter. The other one pits the governor's office against the attorney general's office, and Joe Paris joins us now to kind of, well, explain the whole filing fiasco.
Yes, and to be very clear, we're going to find out a lot more about this in the coming days. But here's a starter pack for you just today. The Idaho Supreme Court filed a notice that oral arguments in this case will be scheduled for August 19th, 23rd, or the 26th. And the request was made to expedite the case, and it's now on track for that. But to answer your question, Brian, Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador filed a brief in response to the suit filed by that private group. He did so on behalf of the defendants, the state of Idaho, acting by and through its Department of Administration, acting as the statutory agent for the state of Idaho, Transportation Department, and the Idaho State Board of Examiners. Oh, that third group, the State Board of Examiners, is where there seems to now be a new conflict. So what is the Board of Examiners? And I'll just quote from our Constitution. This is for Article 4, if you'd like to follow along at home. The Governor, Secretary of State, and Attorney General shall constitute a Board of Examiners with power to examine all claims against the state. Claims like the ITD suit. And the examiners, again, are the Governor, Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. The Attorney General, Raul Labrador, he and his team submitted paperwork, a response to the suit back on May 15th. It was an in-depth answer and response to the claims made by the private group. The problem, Governor Little says he never saw or signed off on the filing before it was submitted to the court. His office writes to me in a statement, quote, "The governor has learned that a brief and answer were filed on behalf of the Board of Examiners in the lawsuit before the Idaho Supreme Court. The filings were neither presented to nor approved by the board prior to filing." So yeah, that Board of Examiners, they all need to agree. So is this tantamount to a legal representative filing things on behalf of their client without their knowledge? That is the big question right now. And you can simply infer here that Governor Little has a difference in opinion about what arguments should be made in court, what was put in that brief. And to be clear, the private group, they are asking for the Supreme Court to declare part or all of the ITD and Department of Administration budgets unconstitutional because it had language in there blocking the sale. And they want to require the state to go through with the sale. So those budgets each contained language revoking the sale. And there's been questions for weeks about if those budget bills are legal, if they survive Idaho's single subject rule for legislation. It's in the Constitution. Well, what does the AG's office think about all of this? They're pushing back on the governor's narrative, saying that the governor's office knew full well what was going on and had options to prevent this whole thing. We'll take a look at a quote here from the AG's office. They say, quote, "The Idaho Supreme Court gave our office 2 weeks to file the brief on behalf of all state parties named in the Hawkins suit. The governor was aware of this deadline from day one. He was informed of our legal strategy at least 1 week before the brief was due. And as the chair of the Board of Examiners, the governor had ample opportunity to call a special meeting but failed to do so. Similarly, he could have vetoed the legislation that triggered the lawsuit. It's curious that his office is trying to blame the Office of the Attorney General for the governor's failure to act promptly on his desired policy outcomes." There are several ways that this could play out, and we will have to wait. I don't want to sit here and guess because there are a lot of different things that could happen. But Brian, as you can imagine here, there is some intensity on the second floor at the State House. The AG's office and the governor's office appear to be at odds on this topic. This is not the first time they've had a difference of opinion.
So what are the ramifications then?
There's a lot of different things that could happen. Labrador could be asked to not be part of the case. They could have special counsel. They could have a retraction and they could refile it. So there's a lot of things that could happen. We'll keep an eye on it.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Well, another county in Oregon pushes to talk about becoming part of Greater Idaho, which might make the torch run for Special Olympics a little longer than it usually is. Here's Aspen Shumpert with today's 411.
Chad Daybell's attorney called his last two expert witnesses to the stand today. The Eastern Idaho man is accused of murdering his first wife, Tammy, and two of his current wife's children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. First up, a digital forensic examiner talked about phones at Chad's Rexburg property in the fall of 2019 when the kids went missing. A local DNA expert testified after. He said Chad's DNA wasn't on any of the evidence he looked at. The defense still needs to rest. A 13th county in Oregon has passed the Greater Idaho measure. Crook County voted yesterday 86-7 supporting Greater Idaho. The goal of the measure is to take a large part of eastern Oregon and make it part of Idaho. Proponents argue the people and land of eastern Oregon would be a better fit to the politics and culture of Idaho, although nothing has officially been passed in either state for the movement. Law enforcement carried the torch as they ran with Special Olympic athletes for this morning's run in Sun Valley. Sun Valley Police, the Blaine County Sheriff's Office, and the Haley Police Department took part in the torch run. That's the 411 on the 208. I'm Aspen Shumpert.
All right, we are back. Let's get to some of your comments. We've got a lot of them today. We'll see if we have time to get to as many as we can. Technology issues. Who knows what's coming up next? Could be yours. Let's see. What do we have? Let's start with it. What do we got? There we go. All right. PJ in Nampa. Is it possible that holding a presidential caucus was not only about being relevant by being early? Was the hidden goal to reduce voter turnout as a way to leverage the Republican Party away from the center? Let's think about that one for a little bit, PJ. Let's go to the next one. Is it a shame that the current Republican Party can't let people think for themselves? Signing a pledge isn't conservative, it is fascist, says Larry. Next one. Let's see. Sorry to disappoint the ousted Republicans, but stop blaming everyone else. Even us longtime Republicans are tired of the way you are running things and want to change with some new ideas and new people, says Colleen. That's Colleen in Boise. The 208 can be conservative. Oh, I know can be conservative, yes, but there are a huge number of individuals who are sick of hearing about party. The Idaho government is not a party place, but a people place. Act on behalf of all Idahoans, not just your own party. Sandbox, says Darren in Nampa. During Soviet communism, military units each had a political commissar to ensure the party's ideology was being followed. Today in Idaho, Republicans use their central committees to censure lawmakers who represent their constituents rather than the Republican platform. Is this the direction we really want to go? That's from Greg, a registered Republican. All right, all those questions are good ones. We'll see what we can come up with when it comes to answers.